So we'll be discussing detectors, smoke detectors. So what this will just be an outline of what we're going to be discussing in this module, in this part of the fire alarm system. We shall be talking about the detectors. What we shall go through is we shall what are detectors? We shall define detectors. Simply, these are automatic devices that sense a fire event. Um, what we need to know is we need to choose the right detector for the right place and install it in the right way. We need to make sure that the system is not too sensitive because this will result into false alarm. And then we must also make sure that the system is not sensitive, or else the property or life within the building will not be protected. So the next thing we shall discuss is the various types of detectors. Um, what I've kind of basically categorized it into four types, four broad types. Uh, and under each type, we will define what it is and the application. But let's just go through the four broad types of detectors. The first one is the heat detector, which senses heat, the temperature within the room. It's sensitive to temperature. There are two types. We have the rate of rise, and we have the fixed temperature. Um, Also, we have the second broad category is the smoke detectors. Uh, there are various types of smoke detectors depending on the application and how it is constructed. We have the ionization smoke detection, optical smoke detector. We have the carbon monoxide sensor, beam detector, laser point detector, um, video smoke detection, and aspirating fire alarm system. Basically, this all these application, all these types, they sense when they sense smoke, either thick smoke or just before the onset of the fire, when the atmosphere is full of either the thick black smoke or the white smoke. You understand? So these devices they sense the particles of the smoke in the air and they trigger an alarm. You understand? The first type senses the heat when the temperature of the room um, goes be above a certain level, then it triggers an alarm. The second one they sense smoke. Okay. The third broad type is a flame detection. The flame detector, flame video detector. This actually senses the actual burning, the actual fire when the fire is burning. There's some certain installation that they don't go, where in an environment where you've got a chemical, you might move, you might not go through the phase of heat and then smoke and then fire. You might go straight into fire. You want to be able to sense. You want to be able to sense the fire. So you use a flame heat detector. Okay. And then the fourth category is it's a combination, it's an hybrid of a smoke and a heat detector, and it's called a multi-sensor combined into one device. So that's what it is. So the next thing we're going to be talking about is the location and sighting of fire alarm devices. Uh, Things you have to consider when you are sighting and locating fire alarm devices. Number one is the category of the system. The category of the system will tell us the rooms within the building that require um, coverage. So there are two types, there are two categories. You have the property category and the life category. Under the property, we have the P1 system and the P2 system. The P1 system provides coverage for all the rooms within the building, and the P2 system provides it for based on risk assessment. Okay. Under the L category, we have the L1, the life life safety category, we have the L1, L2, L3, L4, and L5. The L5 is based on risk assessment only. So you only use a risk assessment to determine which parts of the room, which parts of the building require fire alarm. The L4 requires coverage for only the escape routes, only the escape routes. The L3 system, you cover the escape routes and every room that leads into the escape routes. Okay. The L2 system, you cover the escape routes, rooms into the escape routes, and any high risk area. So you need to carry out a risk assessment to determine the high risk area that you're going to cover. And in the L1 system, you cover every room in the building. You don't need a fire risk assessment. Every room will be covered. All you need to now do is determine which type of the detector is suitable for that room, for that environment. Okay. So the first thing you've got to do is category of system. The category is defined, is usually defined by the client, and the client will need to employ either a fire engineer to determine which category that building will fall under. Also, within the British Standard Regulation, there's an appendix that gives us a guidance. This appendix on which type of category to consider for various types of building. So you can consult that if you are not carrying out, if the client doesn't really know, or the fire risk the fire engineer is not coming forth with the information. Okay, so that's the category. First of all, you need to know the category. Second is risk assessment. Now, under the L5 and the L2 system, you must carry out a risk assessment written down. You understand? If that's the category that that building falls under. You understand? So there must be a formal risk assessment. You have to employ an assessor. But when you are also designing based on experience, based on just looking at the room and saying, okay, in this room, this is the kind of activity that takes place in the room. You understand? In your head, in your mind, you're also kind of carrying out a sort of an informal risk assessment. So that's also required. You understand? Next, when you are citing the detectors, you need to know the environment. You need to look at the environment. The first thing you got to consider within the environment is the height. At a certain height, some of these detectors will not function properly. So you need to know the height. We shall discuss this in more details later. But you need to know the height of the room. Also, a detector might be suitable. Maybe you got a building that is about 9 meters, and a certain smoke detector is suitable for that 9 meters. You must also think, how will the detector be maintained at that height? Is there any obstruction on the floor? Because you will need machine climbing equipment to get to it. Understand? So you've got to consider the environment. You've got to consider the height of the space. You've got to also consider the various activities that are taking place in the room. So in a room where you've got machines dotted around the area, and it might not be, and maybe the room is suitable for heat, for a smoke detector or a point detector, but because of the machines all over the area, you might need to consider another system because you might not be able to maintain the devices. So you must also consider the activities in that room. You must consider also the type of hazard, indicative type of hazard in the room. Is it chemical hazard? Is there combustible material in there in terms of maybe wood, paper, etc.? So you've got to consider that. Also, you've got to consider the whether there's water, dust, or the kind of impact the device will be subjected to. Okay, so that's the next thing you've got to consider within the environment. All these things you do as a designer, you do it mentally. and from experience. The next thing you got to do when you're sighting is the coverage. So when you know that okay, within a room, a point detector is required, you must make sure that every corner of that room is covered by the point detector. So that means, and what we know is all our detectors, there's a range of coverage. Typically, a smoke detector has a 7.5 meters, 7.5 meters diameter coverage, and a heat detector has a 5.3 meters coverage, diameter coverage. So you must make sure you provide enough smoke detector within a room to cover the entire room. No space must be left uncovered. Okay. Next, you must be able to. Next is sighting. When you are sighting the detector within on a flat ceiling or on a sloping ceiling, you must also consider other services on the ceiling, such as your fan coil unit, your luminaires. Understand? You must also have some building structures. Maybe there is a downstand beam, or maybe there is a furniture within the room that is up to the ceiling or up to very close to the ceiling. All these things must be considered when you are sighting your detector. So you can just so number one, you need your furniture layout. Number two, you need your structural drawings within the room. And then number three, you need your mechanical and electrical drawings to be able to correctly sight your detectors, or else the function, of the detector will, it's not going to function as required. The system is not going to function. Okay. And then lastly, what we're going to discuss is detection zones. How do you zone your detection so that a fire brigade can quickly identify where the fire event has taken place, which device has triggered the alarm. Now, when you are using an addressable system, some people will say you don't need a zone chart because all the devices have an address, and when the fire brigade comes to the panel, they will be able to know which device has triggered it. That's correct. But if the evacuation, there are two types of evacuation. If there's the total evacuation, and then there's a phased evacuation. When you are using uh, total evacuation, then you don't need a zone chart or zoning your building. But when you are using phased evacuation, your detectors must be zoned. We'll talk about this in detail. We'll talk about this in detail in the modules. So just to kind of summarize what we've talked about now, we've talked about the types, what a detector is. We talked about the types of detector. You have your heat, your smoke, your flame, and your multi-sensor. And then we've talked about the things to consider when you are sighting your fire alarm detectors. You need to know the category, carry out a risk assessment, know the environment you are placing the device, make sure all the space, the coverage, all the space within that a room is covered, and make sure you consider other systems on the ceiling. And then lastly, we talked about the zone detection. This is just an outline of what we're going to be discussing under the detector. We'll talk about this more into details with drawings showing exactly what we're talking about. Thank you.